Welcome back, everybody. Samurai here. We are on part 3 of Kaldheim set review. Today we're going to be looking at the red cards that have been spoiled for the upcoming Magic the Gathering set. So, if you watched the first two videos, you probably have a good understanding of how I'm evaluating these cards now, but in case you missed them and you're starting on this, maybe because you're like me and red's your favorite color, if I think a card is a new staple, I believe it represents the color well and will be played in a lot of cards that are utilizing that specific color. A constructed playable card is a card that I think is going to find a place in some form of constructed deck, whether that's going to be in Commander, Standard, Modern, or any other deck where you play with or any other format where you play with a pre-constructed deck. Limited playable cards I think are good only in the limited or drafting format. Not good enough to see constructed play, but better than just being thrown in the garbage as soon as you open them, which is exactly what a pack filler card is. A card that has really no redeemable quality or is extremely undervalued, not good enough to see play in any format. So with that out of the way, let's get started. First red card that we are looking at is called Vault Robber. He's a 1 and a red for a dwarf rogue creature who is a 1/3. He additionally says you can pay 1 and tap him to exile a creature card from your graveyard to create a treasure token. This is a lot better than it looks, I think, and I think it's constructed playable. The only reason I think that this is so good is it does something that red really suffers with, which is giving you a mana advantage. So you can pay 1, exile a creature from your graveyard, and then you get effectively, maybe you're never going to want to use it this turn because you're not really gaining any mana because you have to pay 1 to do this, but you pay the 1 and then on an upcoming turn you get an additional mana when you sacrifice that treasure token. So I think this is a card that's better than it looks, and it also has synergy with treasure and artifacts. Maybe that comes into play, maybe not. But I think this card is better than it looks because it helps mitigate the disadvantage you normally have when playing red. Next card is Teskiri Firewalker, 2 and a red for a human berserker creature who is a 3/2 with boast. So obviously boast is a mechanic that's being printed for the first time ever in the Kaldheim set. I've said in the last two reviews, I don't think the boast mechanic is very good. However, this card is a little more interesting because it's the first card that we've seen with boast where you only have to pay 1 mana to do it. I think on every single other card we've looked at so far, it was 1 and then a mana of the specific color that that card is in. But anyway, this one says when you attack, you can boast it for 1, and then you exile the top card of your library. You get to play that card this turn. So I think this might be okay in limited. If you play this on 3, turn 4, maybe you boast it, and you can exile a card and you can play it. One of the big drawbacks for this card that I think stops it from being constructed playable is you have to attack and you also have to use mana to exile that top card. And when you're using the mana to exile the top card, you don't get to use that mana to play the card that you exiled. So it's going to feel really bad if you do this on turn 4, you pay 1 to boast, you only have 3 mana left over, and then you exile a card that costs 4 CMC, and then you can't play it. So I think that's the worst case scenario for this card. Maybe this card gets you some value, and it's on a decent 3/2 body, so I think it's okay in limited, not good enough for any constructed formats. Next card is Tormentor's Helm. It costs 1 red for an artifact equipment. You equip it to a creature to give it +1/+1. It also says if that equipped creature becomes blocked, it's going to deal 1 damage to the defending player. It only costs 1 to equip this card. So equipment like this are often not very good. I mean, you're effectively paying 2 mana to give something +1/+1. That's not great. Yes, it has that effect of having it deal 1 damage to the defending player. That's almost never going to matter. I think in limited it's okay because once you get this on the board, you give a creature +1/+1, and then if that creature dies, you just pay 1. If you're paying 1 to give a creature +1/+1, that's not bad, especially if you have mana floating around. Otherwise, I definitely don't think this is strong enough to see constructed play. I don't even think it's good enough to see constructed play in equipment-focused decks. It just does, I don't think it does enough. Next card is Squash. You pay 4 and a red for an instant that says this spell will cost 3 less to cast if you control a giant. So if you control a giant, this costs 1 and a red. And Squash deals 6 damage to target creature or planeswalker. So in limited, premium is removal. So you don't get a lot of removal options. So generally, even removal that's not great will see play because you don't have a lot of choices. I think this is an example of one of those cards. Worst case scenario, you're paying 5 to deal 6 damage to a creature. That's really bad and constructed, but in limited that's okay because there's very rarely going to be a creature that has more than 6 toughness. So this is effectively deal 5 damage and destroy any creature on the board. If you happen to have a giant, it becomes really good because it's 2 mana deals 6 to any creature. So effectively 2 mana destroy any creature on the board. So I don't think that is going to happen frequently. There's a couple of giants, but probably enough to be able to do this consistently. I also don't think there's enough giant support to see an actual giant themed constructed deck. So for that reason, in limited, this is fine. Even if you have to pay 5, it's fine enough. But definitely nowhere near the power level it would need to be for constructed format. Next card is Smashing Success. You pay 3 and a red for an instant that says destroy target artifact or land. If an artifact is destroyed this way, create a treasure token. So this card already exists in better forms, which is why I think it's pack filler. The only reason this card is a new card is they tacked on if you destroy the artifact, you get a treasure token. Red has so many spells where you can destroy an artifact for 1 or 2 mana, which is really good, and that red also has ways that you can destroy land for 2 or 3 or even less mana sometimes. So this card is a utility card because it lets you do both, but it doesn't let you do either well. Yes, you do get the treasure token if you hit the artifact, but again, why wouldn't you just pay a 1 mana spell if you need to destroy an artifact that bad? Because you could say, oh, well, if you destroy the artifact, this effectively only costs 3. That's still way worse than just paying 1 to destroy an artifact. So this card's absolute pack filler. I don't think it's good at all. Next card is Seize the Spoils. It's 2 and a red for a sorcery. It says, as an addition to cast this spell, you have to discard a card. You get to draw 2 cards then and create a treasure token. So this card is going to look very similar to cards that we've seen before. I think Cathartic Reunion is the most recent one, or Tormenting Voice is also the exact same as this card. Those cards cost 2. This one costs 3, but it gives you a treasure token. So it costs more the turn you play it, but on additional turns, it can help ramp you into something better. I think this is constructed playable in specific decks. Any deck that's focused around wheeling your hand, drawing a lot of cards, discarding a lot of cards, I think this card is pretty good. You probably don't mind paying that 3 mana to do that on this turn because you know your next turn is going to be more powerful. I think this card is even probably decent in limited. I don't think it's pack filler because I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting to pay that 3 mana up front and then get a better play the following turn. Because usually when you're doing this, that's kind of your turn. You're just doing this anyway. So setting up for a more powerful following turn, I think that's interesting, and I think it sees play in those looting and wheeling decks. Next card is Run Amok, which is 1 and a red for an instant. It says target attacking creature gets +3/+3, gains trample until end of turn. So this is definitely not good enough for constructed. It's too narrowly focused. You have to play it only on an attacking creature. So you can't use it as a combat trick when you're behind, when you're in the defensive role. This is like a win more card. You only get to play this card when you're already ahead. You're already in a position where you're able to attack. Sometimes it'll be cool because you can combat trick this to get +3/+3 after your opponent declares their blocker, and then you get a good value interaction where you kill their creature and you trample through some damage and your creature survives. When that happens, you're likely to just blow out the game. But like this card is only good when you're already ahead a lot of the time, and for that reason, I don't think it's good enough in constructed. Next card is Open the Omen Paths for 2 and a red, which is an instant spell that says you can choose one. Your first option is you can add 2 mana of any one color and then add 2 more mana of any other color. You can spend that mana only to cast creatures or enchantments. The second option you can pick is creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. So, in my opinion, these 2 options are not created equally. The first option is so much better than the second option in 99% of circumstances. There's a lot better ways to give your creatures +1/+0. Paying 3 mana to do it, I don't think is efficient. However, where this card really shines is the first option. So you pay 3 and then you pick option 1, and then you have 4 mana available to spend. So again, this goes back to that first card where we were looking at. This helps to circumvent one of Red's weaknesses, where it has trouble keeping up turn for turn with other colors like green specifically that can ramp with their spells. So this is cool because it gives you a little bit of mana ramp. Yes, it's only for 1 turn, and yes, you need to utilize all that mana this turn. But I think for that reason, this could see play in some constructed decks because, like I said, it is helping to circumvent a weakness that Red is known for having, and that it just can't keep up. So this gives you a little tempo for that turn. Sometimes you play it on turn 3, and you get to play your turn 4 spell right away, and that gives you the tempo, and it can put you ahead on board when you need it the most. Um, so I think in almost every circumstance, you're picking option 1, but maybe there's a situation where you can pick option 2 to help win you a game on a specific turn. So really cool card. I like this card a lot. Next card is Frostbite. You pay 1 red for a snow instant. Frostbite deals 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker. If you control 3 or more snow permanents, it deals 3 damage instead. So, this is Lightning Bolt, which forces you to jump through a couple of hoops to make it Lightning Bolt. And obviously, Lightning Bolt's a really, really powerful card, so they're not going to be reprinting that for Standard, I would imagine. So, in order to reach the power level of Lightning Bolt, they're going to make you do some things. How frequently can you do this? We don't really know because we don't know if there's going to be a snow-themed deck yet. From what we saw so far, it looks like green is getting the most snow support. If there's any sort of Gruul snow deck, I think this card could fit in there. You also need to take into consideration that this is also worse than Lightning Bolt because it can't go face. This can only hit creatures and planeswalkers. So because it's so narrow and because you have to jump through so many hoops to get it to do that 3 damage, there's no way that this can be a staple card, but I think it's playable and constructed. You can, a lot of the times when you're playing Shock, a 1 mana deal 2, you're using that to destroy a creature anyway. So I don't know how much that factor of it can't hit face or your opponent directly is that important. If you manage to put this in a snow deck and get it to deal 3 damage, this card's crazy good. So constructed, playable, especially if there is a snow deck in red, or probably most likely Gruul, if I had to take a guess. All right, next card, Hagi Mob, 4 and a red for a troll berserker creature. This is a 5/4 body with boast. It says you can pay 1 and a red when this creature attacks to have Hagi Mob deal 1 damage to any target. God, this card is really not good. Its only saving grace is that it's on a decent 5/4 body. However, I don't think that makes it good enough. This effect is so bad. Like, I just don't understand. You have to attack with it, and then you have to pay 2 mana, and after you do that, it deals 1 damage. You're paying 7 mana a turn after you've played it for a 5/4 that deals 1 damage to any target. Man, this card sucks. It's so bad. It's not even good in limited, I don't think. Next, Dwarven Reinforcements. 3 and a red for a sorcery that says create 2 2/1 red dwarf berserker creature tokens. This card you can foretell. This is the first red card that we've seen with foretell mechanic. Foretell means you can pay 2 mana, and every single card that I've seen, when you foretell it, you have to pay the 2 to exile it face down. And then if it's not an instant, you have to wait a turn until you can play it again your following turn. So anyway, if you jump through all these hoops, you can play it on a following turn if you pay 1 and a red. So how is this card just value-wise? You're effectively paying 4 mana, whether you foretell it or not, for 2 2/1 red dwarf berserker creature tokens. How good is that? I don't think it's that bad. I think it's decent and limited. Getting 2 2/1s is better than it looks, honestly. I think I'd rather have 2 2/1s than 1 4/2 in a lot of circumstances, because there's not a lot of board wipes, so you're usually not worried about that. This might fit into something aggressive. Maybe you can utilize having more creatures. Maybe you can just end up double blocking with it. I don't know. This isn't the worst card I've seen, if there's any sort of dwarf or berserker synergy, this gets a lot better. But yeah, probably too slow for constructed. You're you're not horribly upset if you get this in limited, but there are definitely better choices. Next card is Doomscar Titan. He's 4 and 2 red for a giant berserker creature that's on a 4/4 body. It says when Doomscar Titan enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of the turn. So this card does give itself haste, so we can evaluate it as a 6 mana 4/4 with haste. Again, this card can be foretold. Don't think that makes it any better, because it's still costing 6 mana at the end of the day, and you can't play it on the turn that you foretell it. The issue that I see with this card is it's so expensive, it's hard to combo it with anything else. So this card would really shine if you could play it alongside maybe 2 or 3 other creatures and give everything that you've just played +1/+0 and haste. That's so rarely going to happen because of how expensive it is. So I think the card's super slow. I think it's way too slow for constructed, and I think it's probably even too slow for limited. So I think it's pack filler. Um, it is nice that it gives itself haste, but it's so expensive at 6 mana that at that point, if you're paying just 6 mana for a 4/4 haste, I don't think you're getting enough value out of it. Next card, Demon Bolt. 2 and a red for an instant that says Demon Bolt deals 4 damage to a creature or planeswalker. This one can also be foretold. Exile it for 2. You can play it for 1 red later. This one is at least at instant speed, so you can pay the 2 and then you can pay for the foretell cost immediately on your opponent's next turn. I don't think that really changes anything because you can do the same. You can just keep 3 mana open when you end your turn and do it anyway. So again, the foretell I don't think does anything special for this card. So effectively it's a 3 mana deal 4 to a creature or planeswalker. That's way too weak to ever see playing constructed, but unlimited, we already talked about this. Removal is so premium that 3 mana deal 4 is okay in a lot of circumstances. Next card is the Cinderheart Giant. He's 5 and 2 red for a giant berserker creature with a 7/6 body. That says when Cinderheart Giant dies, it deals 7 damage to a creature an opponent controls chosen at random. So this card is so expensive, and the randomness of its I neglected to say it has trample, I think. The randomness of its exiting the battlefield effect makes it so much worse. If you could target this, it would make it better, obviously. I don't think it would make it good enough to see constructed play, but I think this card is surprisingly good in limited. You get a 7/6 with trample that your opponent doesn't want to remove unless they have a really wide board with a bunch of little small weenie creatures. This feels really bad when it dies and the 7 damage goes into like a 1/1 or a 0/1 or something that's just sitting on the board. That sucks. But if your opponent's board is like 2 5/5s, and maybe you trade this into one of the 5/5s, they deal with it, and then the effect destroys the other 5/5. That's really good. The issue is this card is just so slow. It's so slow. It's too slow to ever see constructed play, I think. Next card is Breakneck Berserker. 2 and a red for a dwarf berserker creature. 3/2 body with haste. So there's not a lot to say about this card. However, this card looks like it goes right into mono red aggro. So because of that, I think it's playable card in constructed, because a 3/2 with haste, it's just sometimes that's just what you need in that aggressive red deck. Red doesn't have a ton of turn 3 plays right now. It has Anax, it has the Phoenix, and it has the giant Bone Crusher Giant. Other than that, you're not really doing anything else on red. Anax is a slower play. The Phoenix is a pretty fast play too, but that's a 2/2. This is a 3/2. And especially in budget decks, because this is a common. So mono red, budget aggro, even maybe just mono red aggro, I think can utilize this card to great effect. This card's actually also pretty decent and limited too, but it's not a staple by any means. The issue with this card is it can be replaced by so many other cards. Next card is Axguard Cavalry. 1 and a red for a dwarf berserker creature with a 2/2 body. You can tap the Axguard Cavalry to give target creature haste until end of turn. So this is a weird card to evaluate. By itself, it's not good. It's just a 2 mana 2/2. You can't do anything with it the turn that you play it. This card, I think one of the saving graces about this card is it's a low mana card, which is usually bad in the late game. But this card's okay in the late game because it has an effect that can make your late game cards a lot better by giving them haste. Is that good enough for constructed? Probably not, because there's better, more effective ways to give your creatures haste, like Swiftfoot Boots, Lightning Greaves, for example. I don't know if you need a redundancy of that effect um, too many times within one deck. However, in limited, like I said, I think this card is okay because if you get this card in the late game, normally you'd be upset to get a 2-drop, but this one has a pretty powerful tap effect, so limited playable. Narrowly avoids being pack filler. Next card is Fearless Pup. You pay 1 red for a wolf creature who's a 1/1 with first strike. This little guy has Boast. This one is expensive to boast. You have to pay 2 and a red. If you do that, Fearless Pup gets +2/+0 until end of turn. This card looks unimpressive, but it has that same effect that the hasty 3/2 guy, the dwarf we looked at, where this goes right into mono red aggro. Mono red aggro has used 1 mana 1/1s with first strike several times before. I'm currently using that with the Fervent Champion. It's played because it's a 1/1 first strike. Now, granted, that card's a little better because it has haste, but this guy has the additional boast effect. Is that going to matter all the time? Probably not, but the boast on this card gets so much better because he also has first strike. So if you can boast it up to a 3/1, it makes it harder to block. I do think because at the 1-drop range right now in mono red, they really only have Fervent Champion, and they have that other Goblin that I think's been seeing play. It's just a 1/1 haster. I think this is better than just playing a 1/1 haste. The first strike is pretty decent, and it gets a little utility from the boast. Next card is Immersturm Raider, 1 in a red for a Demon Berserker creature who's a 2/1. It says when he enters the battlefield, you discard a card. If you do that, you draw a card. This card is sweet. This is a 2 mana 2/1 that loots. I don't have anything really bad to say about that. This is a really good card. It's good in constructed decks that are looking to discard cards and draw cards, loot or wheel. This card is really good in limited because it cycles. You can play this if you have too many lands. You discard a land, you draw a better card, hopefully. So in a lot of circumstances, this card is actually surprisingly good. Do not be fooled by this card. It doesn't look impressive. I think it's a lot better than it looks. Next card, Shackles of Treachery. 2 in a red for a sorcery that says gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature, and you give it haste. If this creature deals damage, destroy any equipment that happened to be attached to it. So this card is Active Treason with some additional text that says whenever this creature deals damage, destroy target equipment attached to it. How often is that going to matter? Probably never. There might be a niche circumstance where that actually happens. Man, I really don't think this card is good at all. Maybe every once in a while, if you had an unlimited, you can steal a game somehow. If you just steal their one big creature, and then you can swing in with it. And if you have another board, I don't know. I just think this card is really so bad. I don't think Active Treason is really that good of a card. Adding this additional text onto it, I don't think it makes it any better because I don't think it ever resolves that effect. If it does, and you manage to pull it off, congratulations. I just don't, on average, that's not going to happen. On average, I think this is a bad card. Next up, we've got the Craven Hulk, 3 in a red for a giant coward creature who's a 4/4. He has the effect that says Craven Hulk can't block alone. This card is very unimpressive. However, 4/4 in limited is a pretty decent stat line. At the 4 cost, paying 4 for a card that is equal in toughness and power to the mana cost stops being good at 4 mana. So this is the cutoff, effectively. Once you get to 5 territory, you don't want to pay 5 for a 5/5. You don't want to pay 6 for a 6/6 in a lot of circumstances. So this is just like the cutoff point as far as I'm concerned. If you gotta pick it in limited because you have no other good picks, it's going to be mediocre, but it's better than picking something else that's just worthless. But boy, this card is just so bad. There's no way it could ever see play in constructed. But a 4 mana 4/4 is serviceable enough in limited that I think you can pick it. Next card is the Rune of Speed. It's 1 in a red for an enchantment or a rune. So this is the red's version of the rune. Every color is getting one. We saw white and green so far. White's was pretty bad. Green's was okay. Let's see what red does. This one says when rune of speed enters the battlefield, you draw a card. We saw that on all the other runes too. So that's a really good effect for the runes. They cycle you as soon as you play them. This one says if it's enchanted, if you enchant it onto a permanent creature, it gets +1/+0 in haste. So you get, this is 2 mana, draw a card, give a creature +1/+0 and haste. How good is that? I think it's pretty good. It has that additional effect of like if you play this enchantment on an equipment and then you attach the equipment to a creature, it does the same thing. It gives it +1/+0 in haste. I really don't think this is bad. One interesting thing that you can do with this card that you can't do with the other ones is if you enchant an equipment with this that has a really low equip cost, like 1, you can then pay 1 to get to equip any creature with haste and +1. So paying 1 to give something haste and +1 is pretty decent. Like we do that a lot of the time in some constructive formats with Swiftfoot boots. That sees a lot of play. So this can make other equipments pseudo Swiftfoot boots sometimes. I think this one is pretty decent, but I just don't know how good that. Like I said, I just think there's probably better ways to keep giving things haste if you need to do that. Like when we looked at that the 2/2 card that you tap to give something haste. There are just better and cheaper ways to give stuff haste a lot of time. This one does let you cycle, and I think that's a huge improvement. I think this card is very closely approaching constructed play, but I think it just doesn't quite break through the threshold. Next card is Provoke the Trolls. I hate the name of this card, for the record. I just don't like it. I don't know why. I just don't like it. Anyway, it's 3 and a red for an instant. It says Provoke the Trolls, deals 3 damage to a target. If a creature is dealt damage this way, it gets +5/+0 until end of turn. This card is so bad. Holy cow, this card is bad. So if you need to use it as removal, it's a 4 mana, deal 3. That's horrible. If you need to use it to buff a creature, it's a 4 mana, give your creature +5/+0, but it has to survive taking 3 damage. You can give a creature +5/+0 for way cheaper, and it has no negative side effect. This card is, it's costed for the utility of the card, I guess. I mean, this can go face. So can Lightning Bolt, and that costs 1. I don't know. This card's really bad. You have to jump through so many hoops, no matter which way you want to use the card, and it's not effectively costed either way. It's just, this card is a nightmare. It's really bad, and I hope this isn't a trap card where somebody looks at this and you're like, I can give my creature +5/+0, not realizing they have to deal 3 damage to it, or the fact that just giving it +5/+0 for 4 mana would be bad to begin with. Anyway, this card is bad. Moving on. Fearless Liberator, 1 and a red for a Dwarf Berserker creature who is a 2/1. This one can boast. Again, this one has an expensive boast as well. You have to pay 2 and a red to create a 2/1 red Dwarf Berserker creature token. So this doesn't quite make a copy of itself when you boast with it, but it kind of does as far as the stat line. So is that good? Sometimes you play this on turn 2 and limited, and then you attack and you boast with it, and you're pretty happy because then you have a decent enough board. Really, really slow though. And again, the downside of boasting is you have to attack with the creature to get that effect. So sometimes you play this on 2, your opponent plays a 2/3, and then you don't want to attack with this because you're going to lose your Liberator and you boast. So you still get a 2/1, I guess, but that's, if you've effectively not changed the board state at all and you've paid 3 mana. So not a great card. High roll. I think sometimes you can high roll enough with this that you get to play it on 2 if you're going first, and then you get to get the additional 2/1 for no cards, and sometimes you're pretty happy about that. Narrowly avoids being pack filler. Definitely not good and constructed. Next card is the Dwarven Hammer, 2 and a red for artifact equipment. You have to pay 3 to attach this to a creature, unless you pay 2 as it's coming into the battlefield. If you do that, you get to make a 2/1 red Dwarf Berserker and put the Dwarven Hammer on it. Additionally, creatures that are equipped with this get +3/+0 and trample. So what happens when this comes into the battlefield? If you pay 5 mana, you get a 2/1 that you attach this onto immediately. So you're effectively getting a 5 mana 5/1 with trample. Is that good? No, that's really bad. And if you lose that creature, the equip cost for this is 3, so you have to pay an additional 3 to give something +3/+0 in trample. Um, this is definitely not good enough to see play in constructed. This is probably not even good enough to see play in limited because I think it's too slow. Paying 5 mana for a 5/1 with trample is not good. It doesn't matter if you can reuse this equipment in the future, because the equip cost is so expensive. I just like this card is very similar to the Elven Bow card that we looked at before, but the thing that was good about that card is it only costed 3 mana to pay the kicker and put it on, get the elf and put it on. So like this card is just so expensive and so slow. I don't think it's good in any format. Next card, Dual Strike. You have to pay 2 red mana for an instant. It says when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell with CMC 4 or less, you make a copy of that spell, and you can choose new targets for the copy if you want. This card's interesting because it has Foretell, and the Foretell is actually more expensive than just casting it outright for the 2 red. It does have the one added advantage if you have to foretell it that way, that if you're having issues with your mana fixing, you only have to pay 2 colorless and then 1 red. So if for whatever reason you're in a situation where you have enough mana to play a 4 or less CMC card and play this card, but you only have 1 red mana, maybe this matters, but the worlds in which that happen I think are so slim that it's almost not even worth considering. So what is this? It's 2 mana to copy a 4 CMC or less spell. So I think because it has the effect of you can choose new targets for the copy, is it's a little bit of a trap. I think where this card shines a lot is drawing you cards. So if you're playing anything that's like a 2 or 3 mana, draw 2 cards, and then you play Dual Strike to copy that, you're playing 4 mana to draw, I don't know, 4 cards. 4 mana draw 4 is good. Any circumstance where you can get it to be 4 mana draw 6, that's insanely good. I think this card is really good in cycling, wheeling, looting decks. There's a huge theme I've noticed for that in Kaldheim, so I think that's really cool. I think this card is better when you're using it to draw cards than it is when you're trying to use it to remove stuff, interestingly enough. But I think this does go right into those types of deck where you want to draw lots of cards or you want to discard lots of cards, and I think that's really cool. I think this card gets worse in limited, actually, because I think it's harder to consistently be able to use it to copy a spell. I don't think it's quite good enough to be a staple, but who knows? Maybe I'm wrong about that. Next card is Crush the Weak. You pay 2 and a red for a sorcery, and Crush the Weak deals 2 damage to each creature. If a creature that's dealt that 2 damage dies, it gets exiled this turn. You can foretell this one too. You pay 2. On a following turn, you can pay the 1 red, and you get to cast it for 1 mana effectively in a following turn. This is a meta pick card as far as I'm concerned. Because right now, I see this card being really good in Constructed, because there's a lot of Loris decks. And Loris plays a lot of small, dinky things that it wants to recur out of the graveyard. So if a person playing the Loris deck, they play, I don't know, turn 1, 2, and 3, a bunch of stuff that has less than 2 toughness, you slam this down on turn 3, and it exiles their field. So they can't even play their Loris to start getting the cards out. You can also hit Loris with this to exile it. So again, I think this is a meta pick. In the right meta, this card is really good. Is it good in limited? I don't know. I want to say probably not, but in certain constructed metas, I think this card is really quite good. Next is the Basalt Ravager. 3 and a red for a giant wizard creature, 4/2 body. When Basalt Ravager enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to any target, where X is the greatest number of creatures you control that have a creature type in common. So what does that mean? So let's say you have a board. You already have a board when you play this card, and it's I don't know, you have a giant, and you have a troll, and you play this guy. So when this comes into the battlefield, you will effectively have 2 giants. You'll have that other giant, and you'll have this one. So this will allow you to do 2 damage to any target. I think this card is a little bit confusing, and you have to read it several times to really understand what it does. I looked at this card originally, and I was like, wow, I think this card is really slow. You have to have a board state in order for it to do what it wants you to do. It's not statted well for its cost. But then I thought about it a little bit more, and I was thinking, what kind of deck would really want to run this card to get synergy of having a lot of the same type of creatures on the board? And then I started thinking, I was like, something like goblins. Because if you're playing in a slower format, I was thinking commander specifically, you could probably get yourself into a board state where you have like 20 goblin tokens on the field. So what happens when you play Basalt Ravager and you have 20 goblin tokens on the field? This does 20 damage to any target. So I'm thinking like you play Krenko and you make a board of like 25, 30 goblin tokens, and then you play this and you just eliminate a player. So is that a little bit high rolly? Yes. Is it a little bit janky? Yes. Can you get it to work fairly consistently? I think you can in certain decks. You can build around to make this work. And I think when you... It's kind of like Fling, but you don't have to sacrifice a creature. So Fling's not terrible in those slower formats. Sometimes you build up a Voltron style thing, you just fling it at somebody. So I think there is a place for this in some constructed decks. I think this card gets probably worse in limited. Next card is Frenzied Raider. 1 and a red for a Demon Berserker creature. Whenever you activate a Boast ability, put a +1/+1 counter on the Frenzied Raider. This guy's just got a 2/2 body, so he's a 2-mana 2/2. He doesn't have Boast himself, so you are required to have other creatures that are boasting. This card would be good if Boast was good. Like 90% of the cards that we've seen so far that have Boast have been very underwhelming, and you probably wouldn't want to play them. So because Boast is not good, this card is subsequently not good. If Boast was or ever becomes good, this card gets a lot better. Regardless, I think it's pack filler because the mechanic's not very strong. Next card, Tybalt's Trickery. So this is a card that's been getting a lot of attention, and you're about to find out why. You pay 1 and a red for an instant that says counter target spell. So yes, you read that right. This is a red mana card that just counters any spell. So there have been counter spells in red before, but they've been color hate spells. So I'm thinking of like Pyroblast. It specifically only lets you counter a blue spell. So this lets you counter any spell. And it's not limited to instants or sorceries or creatures. It's just 2 mana counter any spell. So there's a lot more to this card. So after you counter the spell, you get to choose 1, 2, or 3 randomly. So I'm imagining you're going to roll a dice. So the controller of the spell that gets countered is going to mill cards equal to 1, 2, or 3. After they do that, they have to start exiling cards from the top of their library until they hit another non-land card. So they exile, so maybe they exile a land, maybe it's another land. So finally they get an actual spell. So what happens when they get that spell? They get to cast that card without paying its mana cost. And then additionally, everything else that was exiled, it goes to the bottom of the library. So that part's not really that important. So what's important to know about this card? It's a 2 mana red counter spell. It does mill a couple of cards. I think that's inconsequential. It allows your opponent to play effectively any card from their deck for free. So there's a lot of things this card is a gamble. This card is very similar to Chaos Warp. In that like you're hopefully going to use it to target a must remove threat. So you have to play this card at the exact specific time when your opponent's going in to hit their big combo piece, to hit their big threatening creature, and hope that they low roll into something less effective or less beneficial than the card that you countered or the card that you Chaos Warped. Regardless, this is still a 2 mana counter spell in red. So I think this is going to go in so many red decks. I don't know if it's good enough to be a staple. Like, people would argue, is Chaos Warp a staple in red? Maybe. Some people love Chaos Warp. I'm not a fan of Chaos Warp because I like having control a lot of the times of what's happening on the board or what's happening when I play a card. But if somebody, you just want to submit yourself to the chaos and let this card do what it will, it's going to be fun. Don't get me wrong, this card is going to be fun probably every time you play it, whether you get high rolled, whether you get low rolled. It's going to be hilarious. I just don't know. I don't think it goes into every red deck, but I think it goes into a lot, and it's going to make for some interesting moments. Next card, Magda, Brazen Outlaw. 1 and a red for a legendary creature who is a dwarf berserker on a 2/1 body. Magda gives your other dwarves +1/+0. It also says whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped, create a treasure token. So again, note that Magda herself is a dwarf, so when you attack with her to tap, or you tap her in any other way, you're going to get a treasure. If you manage to get 5 treasures and you want to sacrifice all 5 treasures, you get to search your library for an artifact or dragon card, put that card on the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. So I I think probably the biggest issue with this card is it's not focused. Like, does this card want to care about dwarves? Does this card want to care about dragons? Or does it want to care about artifacts? Because everything on this card affects one of those 3 card types to some extent. But I don't know if it affects any one of them good enough. It's weird. This is going to be a build around card. I just don't know if the decks that you're going to build around are going to be good, because this is not a focused card. So in order to make this card work, you have to build a dwarf, dragon, artifact focused deck. I mean, there's cards in this set that are dragons. There's plenty of dwarves, and there's definitely a lot of artifacts. I just don't know how many of them are going to be good enough to make this synergistic. However, don't ever underestimate the community. The community is going to research. They're going to brainstorm. They're going to theorycraft and find out a way to make this card probably good enough to have its own deck. Am I going to commit the time to making that happen? Nope. But somebody will, and when they do, it's going to be cool, and it probably will be constructed viable. Next card is Reckless Crew. 3 in a red for a sorcery that says create X 2/1 red dwarf berserker creature tokens, where X is the number of vehicles you control plus the number of equipment you control. For each of these tokens, you get to attach an equipment to it. So there's a lot going on in this card. I initially was trying to evaluate this card, and I was like, well, how many dwarf berserker creature tokens would you need to get in order to make this card baseline good? And I was thinking you probably want to get at least 2. Anything more than that seems to be like a bonus, because like paying 4 for 2/1s is the minimum. If you're only getting 1, this card's awful. If you're getting 2, it's average, and anything more than that makes it pretty good. So then I thought to myself, what would be the ideal scenario to play this card? Ideal scenario is when you have like 5 or 6 equipments on the battlefield, and you have a way to give all of your creatures haste. And this becomes an OTK when you're able to do that. So you get all your 2/1s, you attach your crazy big equipments to it. You're like your Colossus Hammer, your Sun Forgers, whatever. You slam it on all of them when they have haste, and you just attacking you, and you probably win the game at that point. It's a design around card. It's a build around card, but I think if you can build around it, it's pretty good, because this is a pretty consistent OTK. When you've established this board, you play the Reckless Crew and you win the game. So it's like a 1 mana, it's like a 1 card win condition when you already have the board. Maybe it's too much of a win more card and I'm over evaluating it, but I think it's cool as a combo, and I think you can probably build around it to make that happen. So our next card is going to be the Dragonkin Berserker. It's a 2/2 human berserker creature with first strike, and also says boast abilities you activate cost 1 less to control for each dragon you control. 1 less to activate for each dragon you control. Unfortunately, Dragonkin Berserker himself is not a dragon, so this card requires you to have other dragons on the board. He has a boast effect himself, which is the most expensive one we've seen by far. You have to pay 4 in a red while this creature is attacking, and you get to create a 5/5 red dragon creature token. The big issue with this guy is you gotta wait till like turn 5 to activate the boast, and he's only a 2/2. So by that time in the game, your opponent is probably going to have something much bigger than a 2/2 to block, and you're going to have to spend probably all of your mana to get that 5/5 red dragon. Man, I don't know. This is a weird one to evaluate, because you play it on turn 2 and it's a 2/2 with first strike, and that's pretty good. Again, I just don't think boast is that good, so I think the fact that you are getting 1 less to boast to pay for like your other boasts are going to matter. Plus you have to jump through a huge hoop of having dragons to make that happen, and then the boast for it is just so expensive. I think in limited it's not bad, because you just put it on the board in 2/2 with as a 2-mana 2/2 first striker, which is just kind of threatening. If you manage to get it to turn 5 and you've got a good board state, you'd start to get some pretty cool value with making all those dragons. But this card is just way too slow to see playing constructed as far as I'm concerned. Next card is going to be the Calamity Bearer. He's 2 and 2 red for a giant berserker creature. He's a 3/4. It says if a giant source you control would deal damage to a permanent or a player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player. So I don't really think that giants have enough support to have a constructed deck. However, this guy himself is a giant, so it will trigger his effect. So when you are attacking or blocking or dealing any sort of combat damage with this dude, he's a 6/4. So is a 4 mana 6/4 good? You bet it is in limited. Is it in constructed? Probably not. It's probably going to be too slow. But I think you're pretty happy to get this in limited. It's not quite a bomb, but if you have some other giants too, you're going to get a lot of value. Next card is Arnie Broken Brow. 2 and a red for a legendary creature who is a human berserker. He's a 3/3 with haste. He can also boast. This guy, when you boast him, you only have to pay 1, and it's not even color specific. You just pay 1 generic mana. He says you may change Arnie Broken Brow's base power to 1 plus the greatest power among other creatures you control until end of turn. So what's your best case scenario with this guy? You've got a board state where you've got like just a freaking 12/12 sitting around. You play this guy for 3. He has haste. So you put him in, you attack, you boast. So you're paying 4 mana in that situation for like a 12/3 haste. Is that good? I don't really know. You can probably... I'm just thinking this card, there's a way to build around this card so that you can utilize that effect that he has to have a significant impact on the board. Because like a 12/3 haste for 4 mana is pretty good. Is it easy to remove because of its low toughness? Yes, and I think that's the biggest problem that the card has. But there's a combo out there. I know that there's a combo out there. I just don't know what it is. But you can combo this card and make it probably an OTK of itself as well. So I'm gonna say don't underestimate the community. If they haven't already, they'll find a way to turn this into some sort of nuts OTK. Next card is Tundra Fumarole. You pay 1 and 2 red for a snow sorcery. The Tundra Fumarole will deal 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker. You will get 1 colorless mana for each snow mana that you spend to cast a spell until the end of turn. So you can play this you're able to play this in your first main phase, and the extra colorless mana will stick around till your end step because it has that effect that says the snow the colorless mana does not disappear as the steps in the phases end like normal mana does. That's in your mana pool. Does that matter? I don't know. Probably not. Is this card good? Again, I don't know. Probably not. I think even if you spend a bunch of snow mana to play this, the added effect is not really that significant. Again, in limited, premium is removal, or removal is premium. So 3 mana deal 4, we saw that with a card earlier. That's serviceable. This is effectively the same thing. If you happen to have, I don't know, a snow mountain, 2 snow mountains in play, maybe you can get that 2 mana. I think the issue that you're going to run into though is that it's the colorless mana, and when you're playing in limited, you're not playing a lot of colorless cards a lot of the time. I think you just have to build around this way too much in constructed to get any real effect off of it. So here we have our first MDFC modal face card for red. It's a Beer guy? I don't know. God of Storytelling. 2 and a red for a 3/3. It's a legendary creature god that says whenever you cast a spell, you add 1 red mana. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. So it has the same effect as that sorcery that we just saw before. Additionally, Bergie says creatures you control can boast twice during each of your turns rather than once. Does that matter? Probably not. Like I said, I don't think boast is very good. Anyway, I'm going to look at the backside, the artifact side of this card before we evaluate it, because the backside is Harnfell, Horn of Bounty, which is 4 and a red for a legendary artifact. That says you discard a card and you exile the top 2 cards of your library. You get to play those cards this turn. The one thing I like about the backside of this card is you do not need to pay mana to exile those cards. So all the mana that you have available to you during that turn, you can use to play those exiled cards. The only prerequisite is you have to have a card in your hand to do it. I'm going to be honest, I actually think the Bergie side of this card is way better than the artifact side, which has not always happened with the other MDFCs that we've seen so far, because that effect of whenever you cast a spell, add red, it's any spell of any color. there's no limitations. You play any card that's not a land, and you get a mana back. That's profit as far as I'm concerned. If you have 1 mana cards, you can play out your whole hand. And then if you have a way to utilize all that extra mana, draw a lot more cards, refill your hand, play more cards, you can have a huge, huge turn with this card. And there's probably, again, don't underestimate the community. I bet there's a way to turn this into an infinite loop, break the game, win you the game immediately. I think this card's pretty good. Is it a staple card? No, because I don't think it goes in every single deck. But I think this card seems easy to build around, and I think it has a very powerful static effect. And if for whatever reason you have to play it for the other side because you ran out, your hand is getting low, and you play it for the artifact so you can get some more value, you're not too upset about that either. Cool card. Next card is the Quakebringer. He's 3 and 2 red for a giant berserker creature. That is a 5/4. He also says your opponents can't gain life. It has that Tibble effect where your opponents cannot heal. At the beginning of your upkeep, Quakebringer deals 2 damage to each of your opponents. This ability triggers if Quakebringer is on the battlefield, or Quakebringer is in your graveyard and you control another giant. So again, this is a build around card. You want to have giants to get this guy's effect. If you're in a multiplayer format, specifically Commander, this card gets so much damage because it's effectively dealing 6 damage every upkeep, because it's going to deal 2 to each of your opponents or more, depending on how many people you're playing with. If it gets sent to the graveyard, you can still continue to recur that effect if you have some other dragons that you can, or giants that you can keep on the board. This card has Foretell. Again, foretelling this card is even worse because you would have to pay 6 mana instead of just casting it outright for 5 mana. So what do I think about this card? I think it's cool. I think if there's any sort of giant tribal deck, or any way, even like heavily themed giant deck, you can continue to do that 2 damage every single upkeep. So every time it goes around, every time you cycle around the board, boom, 2 damage to everyone, whether this guy's on the board or in the graveyard. So I think it's cool. It's definitely not a staple because it's not going to go into every deck. It goes into a very specific deck. But seeing that effect go off every single turn and watching your opponent's life points slowly and inevitably start draining, I think that's cool. And I think this is the last red card that we're looking at today. It's a Torolf, God of Fury. He's an MDFC in red. His mana cost is 2 and 2 red for a 5/4 legendary creature god with trample. So right off the bat, pretty well statted for a 4 mana card. 4 mana 5/4 with trample. There's a lot of cards where that's all they said, but this guy has obviously more text. He has a static effect that says whenever a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls is dealt excess non-combat damage. So they're dealt damage by an enchantment, a sorcery, an instant, for example. Torolf deals damage equal to the excess to any other target other than the permanent that took that non-combat damage. So I think the best way I can summarize or explain or compare this is if you gave all of your non-combat damage trample, but the trample can go anywhere. It doesn't have to just go face. It can also go to other permanents. Anyway, this guy has a backside of the card, so let's talk about that. The backside is Torolf's Hammer, 1 and a red for a legendary artifact equipment. The equipped creature has, you pay 1 and a red and tap the equipped creature, you unattach Torolf's Hammer, and Torolf's Hammer then deals 3 damage to any target. After you do that, you return Torolf's Hammer to your hand. The Torolf's Hammer itself also gives equipped creature +3/+0 if the equipped creature is legendary. You also have to pay 1 and a red to equip it to a creature. So I think Torolf's Hammer side is way worse. If you have infinite mana, yes, in a way to infinitely to tap a creature, does it become an OTK? Yes, but when you have infinite mana, you can OTK with anything. So I don't think that side's worth considering. I think where this card shines is the Torolf side. And the reason I think this is so cool, I don't know if people are talking about this. I'm sure they have, because everyone's probably beating me to it at this point. This card is so good with board wipes. Oh my god, is this card good with board wipes. So you have this guy on the board, especially in multiplayer. This guy gets so much better in multiplayer. There's a large board. I don't know. Let's say each opponent has 3 2/2s. So there's 9/2/2s on the board. You pay 4 mana for Storm's Wrath, deals 4 damage to all the creatures on the board. Okay, maybe you lose your Torolf. No, that's not a good example because you would lose your Torolf. Let's talk about a different one. Um, I don't know. Any board wipe that you can think of that's going to deal damage, not just destroy cards, deal damage to your opponent's creature. All the excess damage to every single one of those creatures can then be redirected anywhere you want. At that point, if you're wiping the whole board, you're going to send it at someone's face. But if you deal 2, 3, 4, 5 excess damage to all those 2/2s, we're talking about like 5 times 9 damage, 45 damage you can direct at one player. That just eliminates someone. So obviously that's a best case scenario for this card, but that's freaking sick. This card gets even better with X costed cards because red does have several board wipes where you can pay X and deal damage to all creatures. So if you got like 15 mana and you deal like 14 damage to all creatures on your opponent's board, not yours, because Torolf has to survive to get this effect to trigger. But if you can do that, there's a world where you can eliminate all 3 of your opponents simultaneously, and that's sick. Again, that's its own deck, and you design around this, so I don't think it's a staple card. It's not going to go into every single red deck, but you design around this card, and you are going to have some freaking highlight moments. I think this card is cool. This is probably one of my favorite cards that we've seen so far in this set, because the combo potential for this card is so insane. I love it. Anyway, I'm so sorry. We have one more card, and this is a good one. I'm so remiss to say that we almost forgot the Goldspan Dragon. Goldspan Dragon is 3 and 2 red for a dragon creature who's a 4/4 with flying and haste. So when he comes in the battlefield, he has haste. You can attack with him right away, which is awesome because whenever Goldspan Dragon attacks or becomes the target of a spell, you create a treasure token. So this guy's a 5 mana 4/4. You can attack with him right away, and anytime he attacks, you get that treasure token. So in a way, you can effectively say this guy's a 4 mana 4/4 because that treasure token is like a net gain of 1 mana. However, if you keep reading the card, it says treasures you control can be tapped and sacrificed to give you 2 mana instead of 1 normally. So you play him for 5 mana, you attack with him, you get the treasure token, which you can then tap for 2 mana. So actually this guy is effectively a 3 mana 4/4 flyer with haste, and that's assuming you don't have any other treasure tokens on the board. And red is really, really good at getting you treasure tokens. Like, I'm picturing a world where you played Dockside Extortionist the turn before that, and you got like 5, 6, 7 treasures in the best world, and then you play this guy, you get another treasure, you're up to 8 treasures, each tapping for 2, giving you 16 mana that you can utilize. Oh man, this card's crazy. I think this is a staple card. I think there are so many red decks that utilize treasures, and even if they don't, just playing this guy by himself as a 3 mana 4/4 flyer, again, he's not actually a 3 mana 4/4 flyer, but effectively for the profit of having that treasure token that you can sacrifice to add mana, it's more or less what he is. It's how I'm evaluating it. This card's bonkers. I don't like him quite as much as Torolf, but I think this card is really, really so good. A staple in my mind. I think this is going to be one of the chase red cards of the set. I think this, watch out for this card. I think it's going to get really, really, really expensive really fast. All right, so this is actually the last card. I don't have any other cards to review today. Thank you so much for watching to the end. I don't know if you agree or disagree with my evaluations of these cards. You can always let me know in the comments what you think. So far we have done white, red, and green. We still need to do blue and black. We still need to do colorless cards, and we're going to need to do multicolored cards. My plan is to try to do one of these every day or every other day so that we can get them all out by the 29th. So if you're using, flattering me and using my reviews as a way to decide what kind of cards that you want or put in the deck, I want you to be able to have all that information before the cards are actually in your hands. So thanks again for watching, guys. Really appreciate it. Please stick around. Look forward to having everybody watch the remaining reviews for Kaldheim. Thanks again.